Do you have any fear that if we don't keep our treaty obligations in Europe, we might, for example, antagonize Belgium to the point where we would lose our uranium supply in the Belgian Congo? And
well, now, number one, I'm not proposing that we repudiate any treaty obligation. There is absolutely nothing in the Atlantic Pact that commits us to one soldier to go to Europe. Not one soldier. Now, as far as the other question, on the uranium question, if the Russians should overrun, we'll say, overrun Europe and take Belgium, I assume there would be an independent Belgian government set up in the Congo, which would be protected by our sea and air power against any Russian control.
Do you think we would have to protect that uranium supply in Africa with a land army, an American land army?
We might. One of the circumstances under which I said I thought we might have to operate on the land is to protect Africa, protect the Suez Canal, protect air bases in North Africa. I think to that extent that doesn't require a tremendous army, but I think that is one of the places where, just as you defend an island, we better defend Africa.
Now, Mr. Brooks.
Senator, in your speech on Friday, you took the position that President Truman is acting illegally in his plans to send American troops to Europe. And I'm wondering how you and others who feel like you do intend to translate that policy into some action. Is there any way that Congress can prevent the sending of troops to Europe?
Yes. Well, my position is that this step of agreeing, it's the contract, the treaty, if you please, to send troops to Europe, which I think the President cannot make without congressional or senatorial approval. That's a step beyond anything we've done. The United Nations was one step. The Atlantic Pact was another. Now this is something else into which we just seem to be slipping without anybody suggesting that it required any further action or consideration. And I think it is a third step which requires congressional approval.
Well, Senator, you have said that the sending of troops to Europe is more likely to start a war than prevent one, but you have also said that you have no objection to sending a limited number of troops. And I'm wondering where you think the line should be drawn.
I didn't quite say the sending of troops to Europe. What I've always taken the position, one of the main reasons I opposed the Atlantic Pact was that I thought the formation of a great international army strong enough to invade the satellite countries was an incentive to Russia to go to war, that they never would permit that army to be built up. That if they saw that army being formed and being built up, it'll take 3 or 4 years to build it up, and if they have an intention of attacking at all, they will attack before the army is there. And therefore, I say it is rather an incentive to war than a defense against war.
You've also taken the position, Senator, that the initiative in arming free Europe should come from the Europeans themselves rather than from us. And I'm wondering whether you think that the Europeans are ready and willing to fight for themselves.
I'm afraid I don't want to express an opinion on that question. That's what we're trying to find out.
Well, suppose
they have evidently been somewhat loath to do it. I don't like to say that they won't fight. Maybe they will. I think, my point is that I think a success, an army there fighting the Russians cannot be successful unless it has behind it the enthusiastic approval of the French and the British and the people who are engaged in it. They can't, if they're forced into it, bought into it, or any other way forced into it, except by their own initiative and determination and decision, I don't think the army will be any good.
Senator, the advance reports we get indicate that President Truman will ask for a military program of something over $50 billion, and a large share of that probably would go, according to the reports also, for the conventional type of land operations, for tanks and artillery, foot soldiers, and all of that sort of thing. And I'm wondering whether there may be any feeling on your part or others that we may be committing our resources for the kind of a war that never will be fought. This seems to indicate an army which would go into Russia, a land invasion. Is there any chance we're going to dissipate our resources for the kind of a war that we may never get into?
Well, Mr. Brooks, the setup that was made in this last appropriation bill, I would go along with. That provides for 1,264,000 men in the Army, 680 in the Navy, 651,000 in the Air Force. I haven't any much question about that. And I think that would run somewhere in the neighborhood of $40 billion. Now, I think beyond that, we ought to seriously consider whether we should go beyond that. I don't say we shouldn't.
Well, are we building?
And I don't know. Of course, also, when you say 50 billion, it depends somewhat on how much is equipment and how much is current operation.
Well,
how many men in the Army.
Would anything beyond?
You may well be justified in your initial year or 2 years where you need a lot more equipment, where the amount will decrease after you've once created your Army, in going beyond perhaps what you can raise in taxes. If you can clearly see where finally you can pay for it as you go.
Would anything beyond that be considered an army of a size which could invade Europe or invade Russia on the ground?
Well, I don't think the Russians are going to be concerned about how large an army we build up here in the United States. The only thing that I think they may well be concerned about is an army which rings them around from Norway to Iran. Able to defend, if they're able to defend that country, well, they're able to march into Poland and Czechoslovakia too, I think. It's pretty hard to, and I don't see why the Russians, why would they wait? If they have the intention of attacking, why would they wait until that army is built up? Why not attack it once?
What's made them wait this long?
If they have not got the intention, then you don't need the army.
Now, Mr. Reston.
Senator, let me ask you this, because this puzzles me about your speech. As I understand the premise of your argument, it is that we should extend the Monroe Doctrine to Western Europe, that we should indicate to the Russians that we're ready to fight if they attack that area. And you make a distinction between defending island bases off the continental land masses, which you would want to do, but you don't want to get into Europe. Now, my question is this. How are you going to get the support of the British and the Japanese and other peoples for getting those air and naval bases if you are not willing to stand alongside them with our armies on the continent of Europe?
Well, rule out the Japanese first. The Japanese are on an island, and if we provide the sea and air base, I think they'd be willing to provide their own troops, land troops. On the continent of Europe, I have made an exception. I'm willing to help them to some extent, but it seems to me perfectly clear that our role is one of a sea and air power, and that with complete control of the sea and complete control of the air, you can make such forays on land. You can do the bombing. After all, the principal deterrent, according to Mr. Churchill, so far is our ability to bomb Russian bases. We're not able to bomb one more Russian base by getting on the continent of Europe with 1 million soldiers. It just seems to me that we are letting the Russians choose the battlefield where they can easily defeat us, or most easily defeat us.
The other half of that question that also worries me is this. As I understand it, what you're trying to do is to urge Europe to make a greater effort than it's made in the past. Well, is it not true that by your speech in the Senate on Friday, you are helping create precisely the thing that you're really afraid of the most, namely that you will really raise their fears rather than removing their fears?
Well, I hope that the European nations will see fit to defend themselves, but I'm not urging them to do it or not to do it. That's their decision. That's their own decision. It ought to be their decision. We ought to be in the position of giving them money and things to force them into a position which they don't accept wholeheartedly. I'm not opposed to it. On the other hand, I don't believe we ought to interfere with their decision. If they want to do it, I think we ought to cooperate, and I've said here that I feel that we should. I should not object to committing some limited number of American divisions to work with them in the general spirit of the Atlantic Pact, if it appears as a reasonable chance of success. And I don't say they have to do it all first, or that we have to do it all first. I'm willing to. Those things ought to be worked out by general agreement.
As a matter of fact, is it not the judgment of the Pentagon that you can get your American troops out of Western Europe if you've got 10 divisions, much better than if you've only got 2 or 3 divisions, that you've got sufficient force so that you can fight a rear guard action to the ports, if worst comes to worst?
I read that in the paper, but I'm not so sure that I don't know what the opinion of the Pentagon is. I read that this morning for the first time, that suggestion that somehow 10 divisions could get out easier than 2. Also, you lose 5 times as many American boys if they don't get out, if that's what you're talking about.